So today we are going to study that we haven't completed about velocity. So velocity is the term, is the quantity which includes what or which measures direction, or which is a quantity which represents both direction and magnitude. Direction and magnitude. Velocity is what? Displacement by time. Displacement by time. And velocity is a velocity has both what direction and magnitude. Direction and magnitude. Speed has no direction. Speed has no direction, but only magnitude. But velocity has both direction and magnitude. And velocity is the displacement by time. And we told that velocity can be changed. Okay, velocity can be uniform and non-uniform. Okay, velocity can be changed if magnitude changes. Velocity can be changed if direction changes. If velocity can be changed if both direction and magnitude changes. So we discussed how do velocity change? How does the velocity change when magnitude changes? Okay, and we discussed about how does velocity change when direction changes, and we discussed. Okay, we have to discuss next is how do velocity changes if both direction and magnitude changes. Listen here. Suppose it's a straight line. An object is traveling from a point to another point A, B, C. Okay, through a path which is a straight line. Okay, now if the object starts its journey from A and goes through this straight line A, B, C and finishes his journey at B. So here if the velocity, suppose the velocity of an object at A is 10 meter per second. Okay, and here is at B is 20 meter per second. Velocity is 10 meter per second. At A is 10 meter per second. At B is 20 meter per second. At C is 30 meter per second. So here velocity 10, 20, 30. So velocity changes. So here 10, 20, 30 is the magnitude value. Okay, value means magnitude. So here magnitude changes, but it is a straight line. Suppose it is south direction and it is north. Okay, so but direction does not change. Always it is traveling towards north, but magnitude changes. So here direction does not change, but magnitude changes. Even though if direction changes but magnitude is changing, the velocity changes. Okay, next case is what? Suppose a body is moving on a circle. Okay, point A, B, C, D. Okay, these are points. We have to find direction and magnitude. At A, suppose the velocity is 10 meter per second. At B, the velocity is also 10 meter per second. In 1 second, object moves 10 meter. At C, object moves 10 meter in 1 second. At D also, object moves 10 meter in 1 second. 1 second, 10 meter. So all points, its velocity is constant. Okay, but direction changes. Suppose the object is moving in this way. Okay. At A, upward direction. At B, towards north. At C, downward direction. At D, towards south. So direction changes, but magnitude does not change. Value does not change. 10, 10, 10, 10. Magnitude does not change, but direction changes. So in this case also velocity changes. Even though magnitude is not changing, but direction changes, velocity change. Even though direction does not change, but magnitude changes, velocity changes. Even though the magnitude is not changing, but direction changes, velocity changes. Even though direction is not changing, but magnitude changes, velocity changes. Okay, so we can say that velocity changes if magnitude changes, velocity changes if direction changes, velocity changes if both magnitude and direction changes. That we can check. Suppose it is a 10 meter, here it is 20 meter per second, 20 meter per second, here it is 15 meter per second, here is 30 meter per second or 25 meter per second. Here is the case. Here at A, what is the velocity? 10 meter per second. At B, what is the velocity? 20 meter per second. And at C, what is the velocity? 15 meter per second. At D, what is the velocity? 30 meter per second. Here, magnitude and direction is changing. Okay. Here, what is the magnitude? At A, what is the magnitude? 10. Isn't it? Direction is what? Upward. Suppose the object is moving in this way. Okay, direction changing, direction is upward. At B, what is the velocity? 20 meter per second. Velocity changes, so that is magnitude changes. What is the direction? Towards right. Okay, at C, what is the magnitude? 15 meter per second. Magnitude is 15. Magnitude changes. Direction is what? Downwards. At D, what is the magnitude? 30 meter per second. And what is the direction? Towards south. Suppose this is south and this is north. This is north and this is south. Direction changes. Here both magnitude and direction changes. Then also the velocity changes. So velocity changes if direction changes, velocity changes if magnitude changes, velocity changes if both change. If both changes. So these are about the velocity. And next we discussed in previous class, we discussed about what average speed. Average speed. If the object is not moving at constant speed, object is moving variable speed, object is moving different speed. If the object is moving different speed, then average, then we have to represent the rate of motion of such object. If an object moves at different speed, 10 meter per second at a point, another point 20 meters per second, speed is different. Okay, another point 30 meter per second, speed is different. So if the speed is different, then the rate of motion or the speed is calculated in terms of average speed. If an object moves at a different speed, then speed is calculated in terms of average speed. Okay, like that, if the object moves different velocity, if the object moves different velocity, non-uniform velocity, variable velocity, then the speed is calculated, velocity is calculated in terms of average velocity. If the speed is different, then speed is calculated in terms of average speed. If the velocity is different, then velocity is calculated in terms of average velocity. So average speed is what? Average speed is total distance by total time. Total distance by total time. And then what is average velocity? Average velocity, total, what is velocity? Displacement. So total displacement by total time. Total displacement by total time. This is the average velocity. Speed is what? Average speed, total distance by total time. And what is the velocity? Average velocity, total displacement by total time. What is speed? Distance by time. What is velocity? Displacement by time. What is average speed? Total distance by total time. What is average velocity? Total displacement by total time. In the same way, how did we find the average speed? Like that we are finding average velocity also. Okay, so next is what? If the velocity is varying uniform rate, okay, if the velocity is varying uniform rate, listen here, then how can we find the average velocity? Listen here, this is A, the point A, and this is point B, this is A, and this is B, and this is C, and this is D. Okay, here the velocity of an object, suppose at A the velocity of an object 10 meter per second, at B its velocity is 15 meter per second, okay, at C its velocity is 13 or 17 meter per second, okay, at D its velocity is 18 meter per second. Here the velocity, okay, velocity in 1 second, 2 second, 3 second, this the velocity is changing different rate, okay, velocity is what? When the object moves from A to B, its velocity changes by 10, okay, in 1 second, and when the object is moving from B to C, velocity changes by 2. Okay, so the velocity is not changing in uniform rate, velocity is changing variable rate. If when the object is moving from C to D, velocity changes by 1, 17, 18. Okay, when the object moves from A to B, velocity changes by 5, 10 to 5. When the object moves from B to C, velocity changes by 2. Isn't it? Velocity changes by 2. When the object is moving from C to D, velocity is increased or velocity changes by 1. Here first is 10, next is 2, next is 1. So here change is not uniform. Change is not same. Change is not same. Okay. First is what? When object is moving from A to B, what is change? 10 to 15, that is 5. Change is what? 5. When the object is moving B to C, what is change? 2. 15 to 17, what is change? 2. When the object is moving from 17 to 18, what is change? 1. So here change is not uniform. Change is not uniform, change is not same. Okay, in that case, in such a case, we are finding the velocity by average velocity, that is total displacement by total time. Total displacement by total time. If the object is moving or velocity is changing, velocity of an object is changing in uniform rate, or velocity on object changes in the same rate, Here there is no same rate. Here first is changing what? By 5, increasing by 5 or changes by 5. Here second, B to C changes by 2, C to D changes by 1. So here change is not uniform. Change is not uniform. Okay, if velocity changes in uniform rate, okay, suppose that we can check how do the velocity of an object change in uniform rate. Listen here, at A the velocity is 10 meter per second, B, C, D. At B velocity is what? 20 meter per second. At C velocity is 30 meter per second. At D velocity is 40 meter per second. Here the velocity, when A to B, velocity changes what? 10. B to C, velocity changes what? 10. C to D, velocity changes what? 10. In this case, okay, when object is moving from A to B, what is velocity changes? 10 to 20, that is 10. And when B to C, when object is moved from B to C, what is the velocity changes? 10, 20 to 30. Okay, 10 is increased, that is 10 is changed. When C to D, what is the velocity? 10, 30 to 40. Okay, so velocity changes 10. So in all case, velocity changes is 10, 10, 10, 10. So velocity change is same. Velocity change is uniform. So when the velocity changes in uniform rate, okay, so the velocity is calculated in terms of average velocity. In that case, how can we find average velocity? Okay, so if the velocity changes in uniform rate, then average velocity is calculated. The average velocity is calculated by initial velocity. Our velocity is equal to initial velocity minus final velocity by 2. If the velocity is not changed in uniform rate, okay, if the velocity is not changing in uniform rate, then average velocity is found by what? By total displacement by total time. Understand? If the velocity is not changing, okay, in uniform rate, or velocity changing not in uniform rate, if the velocity is not changing uniform rate, then, or velocity is changing in non-uniform speed or non-uniform rate, non-uniform change. If the velocity is changing in non-uniform rate, then the velocity is found by average velocity is found by what? Total displacement with total time. If the velocity is changing in uniform rate, in uniform rate, then average velocity is found by initial velocity plus final velocity by 2. If the velocity is not changing, or velocity is changing in non-uniform rate at variable rate, then average velocity is found by by the equation total displacement by total time. Okay, and if the velocity is changing in uniform rate, then average velocity is found by initial velocity plus final velocity by 2. Here the velocity is changed by uniform rate. First A is what is velocity? 10. At B, what is the velocity? 20. So velocity change 10. B to C. Okay, at C, what is the velocity? 30. So B to C, when the object is going from B to C, what is the velocity change? 20 to 30, that is 10. When the object is going from C to D, what is the changes? 10. 30 to 40, that is changes is 10. Here 10, 10, 10. Velocity changes is what? 10, 10, 10, 10. So velocity is changing in uniform rate. In such a case, average velocity is found by initial velocity plus final velocity by time. Average velocity is found when the velocity is not constant. Okay, velocity is not constant. Velocity can be what? Variable. Average velocity is found when velocity is variable. Velocity is different. Velocity is variable. Velocity can be variable in two ways. First is velocity can be variable in non-uniform rate. Second is if the velocity is changing, if velocity is varying in non-uniform rate, then average velocity is found by total displacement by total time. Okay, if the velocity is changing, if the velocity is varying in uniform rate, then average velocity is found by initial velocity by plus final velocity. Okay, if the velocity can be variable in two way, velocity can be variable in two way. If the velocity is variable, then the velocity is found in terms of average velocity. If the velocity is variable, then velocity is found in terms of average velocity. Understand? Average velocity. Velocity can be variable in two ways. One is velocity can be varied in non-uniform rate, and also velocity can be varied in uniform rate. Okay, varied, changed in uniform rate. If the velocity is varying in non-uniform rate, then average velocity is found by what? Total displacement by total time. If the velocity is changing uniform rate, then average velocity is found by initial velocity plus final velocity by 2. Understand? What is average velocity? Listen here. Velocity can be, if velocity is variable, changeable, then the velocity is found in terms of average velocity. Okay, average velocity. It can be varied, velocity can be varied two way, in two way. One is non-uniform rate, right? Okay, in such case, average velocity, okay, varied uniform rate, average velocity is found by found by total displacement by total time, like that average speed. If the velocity is changing in uniform rate, then average velocity is found by initial velocity plus final velocity by 2. Initial velocity plus final velocity by 2. Understand? Okay. So, how do non-uniform rate? Okay. So, suppose an object A, B, C. At A, its velocity is 10 meter per second. Okay. At B is 15 meter per second. At C is 70 meter per second. So, here, when the object is going to A to B, then velocity changes what? 10 to velocity changes by 5. First is 10 meter per second. At A, velocity is what? 10 meter per second. At B is what? 15 meter per second. So, when the object is going from A to B, what is the change? 5. When the object is moving from B to C, what is the velocity change? At B, velocity of the object at B is what? 15. Velocity of object at C is what? 17. So, velocity change is what? 2. So, here the velocity is not in uniform rate. Velocity is non-uniform rate, non-uniform change. Okay, if the object is moving or velocity is changing in uniform rate, then suppose A, B, okay, A, B, C. Velocity of object is 10 meter per second at A, at B is 20 meter per second, at C is 30 meter per second. 30 meter per second. At A is 10 meter per second, at B is 20 meter per second, at C is 30 meter per second. 20 meter per second means 1 second it travels 20 meter. 30 meter per second means in 1 second it travels 30 meter. So, here velocity is not velocity is velocity is changing in uniform rate. Velocity is changing uniform rate because at A is what 10, at B is what 20. When when the object is going from A to B, velocity change is what? 10. And when the object is going from B to C, what is the velocity change? 10. Okay, so velocity change here 10, 10, 10, 10, 10. So here in this case, average velocity is found by final velocity minus, initial velocity plus final velocity by time. What is initial velocity? Initial velocity means what is the first velocity, that is 10. Final velocity is what? It's the end velocity, last velocity. Okay, so initial velocity is the first velocity when the object is moving. What is the velocity? When we are observing the velocity, then that velocity is called the initial velocity. What is the final velocity? Means it's the ending velocity. Okay, when the object is going to end, that velocity is called final velocity. So in that case, final velocity is found by average velocity is found by initial velocity plus final velocity by time. Okay, initial velocity plus final velocity by 2. Okay, so here what is the initial velocity? Average velocity. Average velocity. What is the initial velocity? Initial velocity is 10. What is the final velocity? Final velocity is 30. Okay, by 2. So average velocity is what? 20 meter per second. 10 plus 30 is what? 40. 40 by 2 is what? 20. Understand? So average velocity is what? 20 meter per second. So this average velocity represents that the object might not have traveled, okay, in this speed all time, might not have traveled in this speed all time. Object may travel or may not travel in this speed. Object sometimes travel what? Faster and sometimes slower than this speed. Okay, so sometimes it traveled what? 20 meter per second. Okay, so this means 20 meter per second means the object might not travel all time in this speed, might not travel. Sometimes may or may not. Okay, sometimes faster, sometimes slower, sometimes this speed. Okay, so this is average in this way. If the velocity is changing in uniform rate 10, 10, 10, 5, 5, 5, then the average velocity is found initial velocity plus final velocity by 2. So next we have to do some problems or that we will study next class.